Imagine a quiet, unsuspecting neighborhood in Wichita, Kansas in the 1970s. Suddenly, a series of chilling murders shatters the peace. In the heartland of America, a malevolent force began to stir, one that would leave a deep scar on the community. This shadowy figure was none other than the infamous BTK Killer, a name that would fill hearts with dread and homes with fear. BTK, shorthand for bind, torture, kill, perfectly encapsulated the horrifying modus operandi of this relentless murderer. Between the years of 1974 and 1991, Wichita was gripped by an unseen terror. Families locked their doors, neighbors watched each other with suspicion, and every rustling leaf in the night sent shivers down the spines of the town's residents. The BTK Killer first announced his presence in a way that was as brutal as it was shocking. In January of 1974, the Otero family, a family of four, was found lifeless in their home. The scene was a grisly tableau of violence and terror, a chilling testament to the ruthlessness of the perpetrator. The father and mother, Joseph and Julie Otero, and two of their children, Joseph Jr. and Josephine, were discovered bound and strangled. The entire city was shaken to its core. The Otero family murders were not just the brutal end of four innocent lives, but the birth of a monster. With the Otero family murders, the BTK Killer had marked his arrival, and with it the beginning of a reign of terror that would last nearly 2 decades. He was a predator lurking in the shadows, a boogeyman whose name was whispered with dread. The chilling reality was that he could be anyone. He could be the friendly neighbor next door, the familiar face at the local store, or the stranger passing by on the street. And as the community reeled from the shock, little did they know that the terror was only just beginning. Following the Otero family tragedy, the BTK Killer continued his reign of terror, leaving a trail of victims in his wake. The subsequent murders committed by this predator between 1974 to 1986 showcased a chilling pattern. Catherine Bright was the next victim. In the spring of '74, she was discovered bound and brutally assaulted in her home. Her brother Kevin was also attacked, but miraculously survived, providing the first eyewitness account of the elusive killer. The beast didn't resurface until the winter of '77. Shirley Vian, a mother of 3, was found in her home, tortured and strangled. The children, left unharmed but deeply traumatized, described a man who bore a striking resemblance to Kevin Bright's description. The BTK Killer's reign of terror didn't stop there. In 1985, his modus operandi took an even darker turn. Maureen Hedge was found in a ditch miles from her home, whereas all previous victims were discovered within their residences. This shift in pattern indicated a chilling escalation of his brutality. Throughout these years, the BTK Killer taunted the police with letters. He detailed his crimes, sometimes enclosing mementos from his victims, relishing in the fear he was instilling in the community. He adopted the moniker BTK, standing for Bind, Torture, Kill, a chilling testament to his monstrous acts. Despite the growing body of evidence, the police were left frustrated and baffled. The BTK Killer was careful, leaving little physical evidence behind. His letters, though chilling, provided no definitive leads. He was a phantom haunting Wichita, driving the city into a state of perpetual fear. As the murders continued, so did the exhaustive investigations. The police pursued every lead, every tip, and every hunch, but the identity of the BTK Killer remained elusive. The years rolled on, but the shadow of the BTK Killer loomed large over Wichita. Despite the growing fear and exhaustive investigations, the identity of the BTK Killer remained a mystery. After a decade of terror, Wichita breathed a sigh of relief as the killings mysteriously stopped in 1986. For nearly 2 decades, a chilling silence permeated the city. The BTK Killer, who had once filled the headlines with tales of horror, had seemingly vanished into thin air. Law enforcement continued their relentless pursuit, but leads were scarce. The case went as cold as the winter wind that sweeps across the Kansas plains. The media moved on, the public's memory began to fade, but one thing remained constant. The BTK case was never forgotten. Investigators, haunted by unsolved mysteries, kept the case files active, sifting through evidence and revisiting old leads. The victims' families, weighed down by grief, clung to the hope of justice. The city of Wichita, though quieter and seemingly safer, was forever marked by the shadow of the unknown killer. Yet the spectre of the BTK Killer still hung over Wichita, his identity and whereabouts unknown. In 2004, the silence was broken. The BTK Killer resurfaced, but this time, his craving for attention would be his undoing. After years of lying dormant, the BTK Killer, Dennis Rader, couldn't resist the urge to resurface. He began a new correspondence with the police, sending letters and packages to local media outlets, taunting law enforcement with details of his heinous crimes. However, the world had changed significantly since Rader last communicated with law enforcement. The advent of modern technology and forensic science had revolutionized the way crimes were solved. Investigators now had a new set of tools at their disposal, and they were about to use them to bring this monster to justice. In one of his communications, Rader asked the police a crucial question. If he sent them a floppy disk, would they be able to trace it back to him? In a calculated move, the police assured him they wouldn't. It was a gamble, but it paid off. Rader sent them a floppy disk. When investigators received the disk, they immediately handed it over to their tech team. The forensic analysts were able to extract a deleted file that contained metadata leading to a Dennis at a local church. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. With this information, investigators were able to build a profile around Dennis Rader. They obtained a warrant for a DNA test, comparing it with the DNA found at the crime scenes from decades before. The results were a match. After 31 long years, the BTK Killer's reign of terror was coming to an end. The irony of it all? The BTK Killer, who had eluded capture for so long, was finally ensnared by the very web he had woven. His need for recognition, his desire to taunt those who hunted him, was ultimately his downfall. It was a poetic end to a gruesome chapter in Kansas's history. The relentless pursuit of justice finally paid off. The shadow of the BTK Killer was about to be unmasked. In 2005, the world was finally introduced to the man behind the moniker, Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer. After a reign of terror that spanned nearly 3 decades, the face of evil was revealed, not in the form we'd expect, but as a seemingly ordinary man. A compliance officer, a church president, a husband, a father. But beneath this facade lurked a monster, a predator, who had struck fear into the hearts of Kansas residents for years. His capture came about not through a dramatic chase or standoff, but through a simple piece of technology. A floppy disk. The same device he had used to taunt the police and the media led detectives straight to his doorstep. The subsequent trial was a media circus, with Rader taking center stage. He was not just confessing to his heinous crimes, but relishing in the retelling. As he calmly detailed each horrific act, the courtroom hung on his every word, a chilling testament to the dichotomy of his character. The revelation of his seemingly ordinary life sent shockwaves through the community. Neighbors, friends, even his family struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster now standing before them. The BTK Killer had lived among them undetected for years. He had sat in their churches, attended their community events, even raised a family. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, he'd been planning and executing some of the most gruesome crimes the state of Kansas had ever seen. Behind the facade of a church president and family man was a ruthless killer. The BTK Killer saga serves as a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity. It reminds us that evil does not always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, behind a friendly smile, a handshake, a neighborly wave. It forces us to question, to doubt, to look closer, because sometimes the face of evil is not a face at all, but a mask. The trial of Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer, was a landmark moment in criminal history. Here was a man who had haunted the sleep of Kansas residents for nearly 2 decades, finally standing before the law. The conviction of Rader was a resounding victory, not just for the justice system, but for the community he had terrorized. He pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences. The sentencing of Rader was a moment of profound relief for the victims' families and for the entire community. This was more than just a legal verdict. It was closure. It was a chance for the families to begin healing and for the community to reclaim its sense of safety. Justice may have been delayed, but it was not denied. The BTK Killer would spend the rest of his life behind bars, his reign of terror finally at an end.